here this morning.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Hello, I'm Rachel Syme. I'm a staff writer at The New Yorker, and I am so pleased to be here tonight. You already know our panel, but I'm just going to reintroduce you before we begin. Sitting next to me is the great, wonderful Robert Caro.
I hope you're timing your applause.
Twice winner of the Pulitzer Prize for biography and described by the London Sunday Times as one of the greatest political biographer of our times. Sitting next to him is the wonderful Robert Gottlieb.
Are you timing it?
Who has been working in publishing since 1955 and has been the head of 3 major institutions, including Simon & Schuster, The New Yorker, and, of course, Alfred A. Knopf. And next to him is his daughter and the wonderful filmmaker of the movie you just saw, Lizzie Gottlieb. So, I'm going to begin with Lizzie, actually. I heard that this film took 7 years to make. So one Robert Caro book, basically. So tell me about the process of convincing these two to do the film and how it ended up happening.
Okay, sure. You know, before I do, if it's all right, this film did take 7 years to make, and it's quite extraordinary to be here tonight sharing it with you. And there are a few people who are here in this room who have been with me all along the way, and I wanted to thank a few of them, if you'll bear with me. But really, first of everybody, the person I really want to thank is my extraordinary mother, Maria Tucci, who's right there. None of this would be possible without her. I wouldn't be possible without her. And this guy. And then I also, my wonderful editor, Molly Bernstein, is here somewhere, who helped me put this together from nothing. And our really amazing composers, Claire and Olivier Manchin. Are you guys here? Somewhere? And a few other people. Maria Zuckerman, the most extraordinary executive producer anybody could hope for, was just an incredible partner along the way. And then at Topic Studios, Christine Connor, Ryan Heller, and Michael Bloom have been partners financially and creatively and emotionally all along the way. I also wanted to mention my very lovely husband, Michael Young, and our boys, Jacob and Oliver. And lastly, the incredible Ina Caro. Thank you for lending me Bob and letting us make this film. I may have forgotten somebody. How did I come to make this film? I, as I say in the movie, I grew up in our house that was always filled with writers and actors, and all of my father's writers were very close. And for some reason, I had never met Bob that entire time until my father's 80th birthday. Actually, until I heard Bob Caro give a speech where you were being given an award, and Bob spoke. And he spoke about their collaboration and the productiveness of their collaboration and their fights over semicolons. And it just kind of hit me like a lightning bolt. I thought, I have to tell this story. There's so much going on there. There's so much at stake right now, and so much sort of action, which is, of course, what you're looking for in a film. Action, in my mind, that really, as I thought about it, was about 2 guys who sit in chairs thinking about words. It didn't immediately seem like a cinematic bonanza. But I just had a kind of crazy, wild feeling that I had to do this. And I called my dad the next morning, and I said, I had the best idea. I am going to make a film about you and Robert Caro as you work on Volume 5. And he said, absolutely not. And I said, please? And he said, no. And I just kept asking and asking and asking. And finally he said, you can call Bob Caro, but he'll say no. So with a lot of trepidation, I picked up the telephone and called Bob, and he was so gracious and lovely and kind and essentially said, no, thank you. And then he said, well, that he had seen another film I made, and he liked it, and I could come to his office and speak to him. And over the course of that conversation, he came to say, well, I've never actually seen a film about a writer and an editor, and I think it could be meaningful. And he said, okay. And so we started, and I did not know that it would take us 7 years, but I don't think you can rush a film about Robert Caro.
Bob, I wanted to ask you, why did you think it was important to capture the editor-writer relationship on film?
Well, I don't think, well, that's a terrific question. I don't think people, first place, there aren't many editor-writer relationships that last 50 years. And ours has, you could say we're two people. I found somebody who cared as much about writing as I did. That meant he was going to care about his point of view as much as I cared about mine, So Bob is not the kind of editor, as you become acquainted in the literary world. Different editors, they're editors, they make suggestions, and if the writer doesn't take them, they just turn the page and go on to the next thing. That's not Bob Gottlieb. If he wants something changed and you don't want it changed, you're going to have to sit there and discuss it. And in discussing it, you have to think about why you did it. And that, for me, sort of makes the next thing, when I'm writing, I'm thinking more about why I'm doing things. So that's really why I picked your father as my editor.
It wasn't my smile?
I don't recall you smiling.
I mean, it's interesting because in this film, you say that editing is a service job or should be in service to the writer, but I also think this is a film that glorifies editing in a way that I've never seen before, as a really sort of beautiful, creative thing. And I wonder... No.
It's not a beautiful, creative thing. It's work.
It's work.
It's work. This needs doing, so you do it. That's it. And if you're lucky, you're working on something good, and you're working with someone you care for. So I have been very lucky in this regard. I just want to interrupt to say a personal thing that has nothing to do with anything here, and so forgive me. The last time I was on this stage must have been 40 years ago, when I was introducing Doris Lessing, my beloved author and friend. So it has a special feeling for me.
Well, you've had so many relationships with so many authors. I mean, what do you think about this one being the one that's immortalized?
This relationship?
No, why
I mean,
is this
as
one?
being the one that's been immortalized in film, I mean, it feels particularly significant to you? It's been going on for so long, right? I mean...
Well, I should explain that this film may be about him and me, but for me, it's about her. So that's what I think of when I see this film, which I just did for, I think, the third time. And it's good.
I'm so glad.
She did a good job.
But Dad, the fact that it's about you and Bob. Now, I just took over.
Please take over. Please take over.
But I think it's significant that it's about this particular relationship.
Well, I think in a way, it was. So when I started when I was doing The Power Broker for the first, 5 years or so, Ina and I were really broke. I was doing this book for what I used to call the world's smallest advance. I think that's in the film. We were living up in the Bronx. We had sold our house on Long Island. We didn't really know anybody. We didn't know any writers or any editors. And I realized at some point that I had to, I gave my former editor at another publishing house about 500,000 words of the book. And he said they liked it. And I said, basically, can I have my other $2,500? And he said, I remember this to sentence he said, "Oh no, Bob, I guess you didn't understand. We like it here at the publishing house. We like it here, but nobody's going to read a book on Robert Moses, and you have to be prepared for a very small printing." So that was actually the worst night of my life. I never have to think about what's the worst. I didn't know what to tell Ina because we had sort of run out of any possible resources. And I walked, he had given me, this editor, he had taken me to dinner at this very cheap Chinese restaurant at, I think, at Broadway on 107th Street. And I walked all the way up Broadway because I didn't know what to tell Ina. I was in sort of daze. And I walked all the way up Broadway to the Bronx, back to the Bronx. It was like 1970 or 71. I somehow wondered how I had made it. But I realized at that time, this other editor left his publishing house, so I could leave the publishing house. And I realized that I needed an agent. And this was 1970. I knew only one writer in the world to speak of. And he gave me a list of 4 agents. 3 of them were men, and there was one woman, Lynn Nesbitt. This was 1970, remember? So I couldn't picture a woman representing me. So I went to see each of the 3 male agents, and they all reminded me too much of me. That if they weren't wearing horn-rimmed glasses, they looked like they should be. And they all had tweed sport jackets, and I sort of knew this wasn't what I needed. And finally, I went to see the agent, Lynn Nesbitt, who, as I remember, was just setting up as an independent agent. And she said to me, well, I've read your manuscript, I want to represent you, but you have to tell me, is this in the film? So I'm just repeating what you've seen. And she said, what are you so, what do you look so worried about? I, of course, had, made a mental note that I was supposed to look very confident when I went in there. I said, what I think is in the movie, I don't know how much money, where I'm going to get the money to finish the book. And I remember Lynn's exact words, which I now realize I'm repeating a scene that's in the movie, sorry. She said, is that what you're so worried about? You can stop worrying right now. I can get you that by picking up the phone. Everyone in New York knows about this book. And she said, my job is to find you an editor you can work with the rest of your life. So as I think this is in the movie too, the first 3 editors took me to fancy restaurants and said they could make me a star, which I wasn't interested in. Bob said, I don't have lunch, but we can have a sandwich in my office and talk about your book. And it wasn't that I agreed with what Bob was saying. I think even in that first encounter, I didn't agree with everything he was saying, but I realized that I was talking to someone who cared as much about the writing as I did. Now, in my whole life, now knowing a lot of editors and a lot of publishers, I still have found few people who care about the writing as much as I do. So that is really the answer to your question.
No, it feels like a very unique and singular relationship that not only you two have, but that you had to all your writers. I mean, there was a real sense of intensity and care in this work, and I've never seen it put on screen like this before. I mean,
I don't think it ever has been, because it's very hard to talk about.
Yes.
People have asked me, what does an editor do? I don't know, I know what I do. I don't know how other editors work. I know how I work when I'm writing, and I have an editor. But that's not really a fair test, because I am an editor who writes. And that means that by the time I have shown it to anybody, it has been over-edited. So since I'm supposed to be such a good editor, I don't expect to find editors who are much better than me who are going to help me make it better than what I think it is.
Do you like to be edited?
What?
Do you like to be edited when you write?
Oh, I love the process. It's the process of editing that I like, and I love it. And I don't care whether I'm the editor or the editee. It doesn't really matter. It's the working on the text. It's working on text. It's taking something that's on paper and making it better of what it is, which I keep stressing in the film. And that's the crucial thing for an editor, not to try to make it into something it isn't, but to make it better of what it is. And that requires your understanding of what it is and your sympathy for what it is. Because if you don't like what you're editing, go away. It's not going to work.
So I'll tell you an example of something that I think
Please.
is hard to come by. Take my third Johnson book, Master of the Senate. So Lyndon Johnson comes to the Senate in 1949, and the Senate for 100 years, since the days of Webster, Clay, and Calhoun, has been the same dysfunctional mess that it is today. And Lyndon Johnson, in 6 years after he comes to the Senate, he becomes majority leader and transforms the Senate so that for the next 6 years, when he's majority leader, it's the Senate that is the center of government creativity and energy and ingenuity in Washington. It's not Dwight Eisenhower's civil rights bill, it's Lyndon Johnson's civil rights bill. So I said, well, to learn, first of all, to learn how Johnson does that is to get a master class in political genius, not in political expertise, but in political genius. But then you say, if you really want to show people the extent of this genius, you have to show people what the Senate was like before he did this. How, if you want to show how he transformed it, you have to show what he transformed it from. And all of a sudden, I realize I'm writing a whole history of the United States Senate, and it's going on and on and on, actually, for about 115 pages of the book. As I'm getting near the end of this, I'm saying, oh, I've done it again. I really made a terrible mistake here. There's no place in this book to put it. It belongs at the front of the book. I said, but people aren't going to read 115 pages on the history of the Senate, in which, as I recall, the name Lyndon Johnson is not even mentioned before they get to Lyndon Johnson. But I'm thinking, so I did all sorts of things. I tried to divide it up into little sections and put it in italics at the beginning of other paragraphs. Nothing really worked. So I finally said, well, that's the way it's going to have to be, and handed in my whole manuscript to Bob. And he said to me, basically, he said something almost complimentary at that point.
Never.
Well, that's correct. It wasn't complimentary. And I said, but what did you think about putting the history of the Senate all at the beginning? And he said, there's no place else for it to go. And at crucial points in our relationship, including the point that I know is in the movie, where we both thought of Lyndon Johnson at the same time, you realize that on big crucial points, we're somehow on the same page. Now, I will take this moment to say that you see before you a rather neatly dressed Bob Gottlieb. That's because his daughter was buttoning up his shirt in the dressing room. Now, you had two guys who were not totally similar. In those days, Bob wore T-shirts with really inappropriate slogans on them, and cargo pants, as I recall.
Yes, and sneakers.
So what was happening then, we were working on the Power Broker, and every day about 6 o'clock, Ina would drive in from the Bronx and park outside and to pick me up to go home. So on this one day, I wasn't finished condensing something into a smaller number of pages. So Bob said he would go down and talk to Ina while I finished. So took me a while, and I went down, and there is Bob and Ina talking animatedly through the window of the car. And I got into the car, and I started driving back to the Bronx, and I said to Ina, well, how did you like him? And she said, like who? I said, Bob Gottlieb. She said, was that Bob Gottlieb? I thought it was the messenger.
Yeah. Yes, let's hear it.
Well, I don't even know where to go from there. I mean, so you were simpatico on this idea that the Senate history should be there, but in the movie there's a fight that happens over the matter of grass, right? Or the history of grass.
Yes.
How did you, I mean, how does an argument like that go down? When you're trying to say,
Like butter, it just goes.
oh,
no
so
problem.
smoothly. When you're saying, like, I know this is a project of sort of maximal detail, how do you decide what should come in and come out? I mean, that's a huge question, but I mean, how do those fights take place, or how, where are you reining him in?
Let me answer this.
Yeah.
Because I will answer it truthfully. Somehow, somewhere, somewhen, there came about the notion that editors and writers are at odds with each other, and that it's in some way an adversarial relationship. That is just not the case. There are, of course, moments of disagreement, and they can be sharp. But no, if you don't see the same way, if you don't get along, if you don't think the same way, you don't belong together.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know what people, I guess, like to think that life is a total struggle. And of course it is a total struggle. But if you are somebody who enjoys working with others, collaboration, thinking together, it's great. It's a wonderful relationship, except when it isn't.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's this idea of like being so intensely interested in, should a semicolon go here? It's all in the service of the work, you know?
Absolutely.
That's what people don't realize. It's not like a fight for the sake of it. It's like, how do we make the sentences as sonorous and beautiful and in service of what you're trying to say as possible, you know? It is funny how you say there is this sort of idea that there's an adversarial relationship.
Sorry?
Of an adversarial relationship, because I depend on my editor more than anybody. You know, I think it's such a beautiful relationship when it works.
It should be.
Yeah.
And it should be functional, and it should be pleasant, and should be happy, and should be productive. And if there are problems along the way, then you're there to solve them. You, the editor, are there to solve them. You know, remember, again, I've said it a million times, but it's worth saying to anyone who's interested in writing, etc. Editing is a service job. It's really very simple. And what's wrong with serving? Nothing.
So Lizzie, what was your biggest challenge in making this film? Where were moments where you felt like you weren't sure you could go on?
There were a lot of challenging moments. It was a challenging film to put together because there's so many, you know, I wanted the film to work for people who are huge Robert Caro fans and have read every word and, you know, can't wait for Volume 5. There were many of them. There were many people who I would speak to about this film, and they would start weeping. A lot of grown men weeping, saying, "Where is Volume 5?" And wanting to maybe touch me because I had been in the same room as him. And then they would say, "Are you sure you should be wasting his time?" That's an aside. My producer, Jen, who's not here, said we should put a sign on the poster that said, "No Lyndon Johnson books were harmed in the making of this film." But I also wanted the film to work for people who had never heard of Robert Caro or Robert Gottlieb or Robert Moses. You know, I wanted it to work for people who came to the movie for all sorts of different reasons. So to fit into this film a little bit about who Bob Caro is, a little bit about who Bob Gottlieb is, what this relationship is, all while not having them in the same room as each other. And also who is Moses, a little bit about LBJ, was a lot. So when I came to Molly Bernstein, who's here today, I was like, this is my idea, and I'm very convinced we can do it, but I don't know why. And I had met with another editor who said, no, this is not a movie, and you should step away, really. So that was very, very depressing, but something in me made me kind of just keep going. And Molly said, okay, we'll just start. We're going to start chipping away at it. And we did, and gradually were able to craft a story that we'd try to hand the sort of baton off from one Bob to the other, and tried to make it feel active and alive and vibrant and like a movie. So, when you have these guys, I think, to look towards as inspiration, that helps quite a lot.
But you also did things that most people wouldn't do, like following me down to Texas, and not only into the library, but putting the camera somewhere over my shoulder so you can see the things, or the viewer can see the things that I'm seeing. I'm not sure that the film tells when I say, oh, this is something I didn't here's a telegram from 1940 that when I saw it some years ago, I didn't realize it was significant. Now I realize it's, in a way, the heart of how Lyndon Johnson began to get a toehold on national power. Because what that telegram is, everyone had said to me, if you read, for those of you who have read the Lyndon Johnson books, and for those of you who haven't, the exam is Tuesday. The key thing, when Johnson is a junior congressman, can I tell this story?
Sure.
Take a minute. He's a junior congressman. He's it's 1940. And as you're going through all these papers, you see that suddenly something very dramatic changes. Something happens in October 1940, because there's a presidential election in November 4th, 1940. Before October 1940, all the letters in all these different files that Lyndon Johnson writes are like the letters of a junior to a senior. Can I have a few minutes of your time, sir? All of a sudden, after November 4th, the letters are coming the other way. They're committee chairman and senior congressmen writing to this junior congressman saying, Lyndon, can I have a few moments of your time? Now, at the time, I was interviewing the last remaining Franklin Roosevelt intimates, and from them I found out what had happened in that month. What had happened in that month was Lyndon Johnson discovered that he was the only congressman who knew two different groups of people. On the one hand, he knew the Texas oil men, the Texas contractors. They were the reactionaries. They were the Texas regulars. That's what they were called, as right-wing as you could be. On the other hand, he knew all the Northeastern liberal congressmen who needed campaign contributions, and the Texas oilmen and contractors needed federal favors, and they were willing to give big campaign contributions. And he arranged it so they were told, and they agreed, that all their contributions would come through him, and therefore he had power, the power of campaign contributions. But I was told over and over again, oh, you'll never be able to, you'll never be able to write that kid because you'll never be able to, Tommy Corcoran used to call me kid. He was an old Rooseveltian. You'll never be able to write that kid because you'll never be able to find something in writing. And I, of course, thought that that was right. Everybody had been telling me Lyndon Johnson never wrote anything down. And I sort of believed this. And the telegram that I came across is a telegram. The guy who organized and gave most of the money to Lyndon Johnson was George Brown of Brown and Root. And this is a telegram dated something like October 15th, 1940, from George Brown in Texas to Lyndon Johnson saying, Lyndon, the checks are on the way. And on the bottom of it is Lyndon Johnson says, I'm not going to write any of these guys back, so tell them in person. But you also, because I found that after you had left the scene the next weeks or so, I found, because I now knew what I was looking for, I found this amazing 4 sheets of typewritten paper. They were typed either by John Connolly, who was then Lyndon Johnson's secretary, or by Walter Jenkins, another assistant to Johnson. And what it consisted of, there were 3 typed columns on each page. In the left-hand column was the name of the congressman. In the next column was the amount of money that he'd asked for, very small amounts of money in 1940, $500, $1,500. The third column was what he wanted the money for. Lyndon, $1,500 and I can buy another round of ads. Lyndon, they're going to stack the polls against us. I need $500 for poll watchers. But in the left-hand margin, in Lyndon Johnson's own handwriting, was what he had decided to do about each congressman. So if he was going to give the congressman everything that he asked for, he would write okay. If he would give him part of what he was asking for, he would write okay and the amount, okay 500, okay 750. But sometimes he wrote no, and sometimes he wrote no out. And I asked John Connolly, what did no out mean? And John Connolly said it meant he was never getting money from Texas and Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson never forgot, and he never forgave. So in this 1 month, they learn on Capitol Hill, if you want campaign contributions from Texas, you have to go to this one congressman. And that's how he started, got his first toehold on national power. So Lizzie, by doing what really no one else had ever done, I've been asked all my life, what's it like to go through presidential papers? What are presidential papers? I think you see that in this movie, thanks to her, better than it's ever been shown before.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask about maxims, because I know this movie is named after one of yours, Turn Every Page, and you have another one that sits above your desk. What does it say?
It says, the only thing that matters is what is on this page.
And I wanted to ask if you have any maxims that you work by.
Maxims? Yes.
Yeah, or yes, something that's guided your work.
What guides me, Lizzie can confirm this, is the following. Do it now, get it done, check, check, and check again.
And also, Dad, you always say, give the reader a break.
Well, give the reader a break I inherited from the Mr. Simon who founded Simon & Schuster.
What does
Also,
that mean?
by the way, father of Carly Simon.
What does it mean to give the reader a break?
It means do everything when you're creating a book that will help the reader. Do it for the reader. Give the reader a break. In other words, do not put 2,000 words on a page that can accommodate 500. Do not have folio numbers that are bigger than the text so that your eye is drawn to the wrong thing. Whatever it is, don't make the book the type too small. Don't make it too big. Don't over-ornament it, blah, blah, blah.
Give the reader a break?
Give the reader a break.
I'm going to ask a few questions from the audience, if that's all right with you all. Hudson asks, one thing that comes across in the film, it seems, is that you both share in different ways a consciousness of the rhythm of your work. How it all has working together changed both of your senses of rhythm in writing? This is what Hudson wants to know.
Over to you, Bob.
Back to you, Bobby.
And that sums up our relationship. Let's move on.
Well, that's such a good question, but I'm not sure that, in my case, I don't think it's, you have it either, I mean, one thing that I would say is a lot of nonfiction writing doesn't seem to understand the importance of things that are important. It's my belief that if you want a book of nonfiction to endure, it has the writing, including the rhythm, the sense of place, the setting of scenes, has to be at the same level as a work of fiction, a novel that endures. And the rhythm is a very important part of that. I mean, I don't say I succeed in doing it, but you're always trying to do it. Like in the second, those of you who have read the second volume, when Lyndon Johnson is running his campaign for the Senate, and he's in the hospital for 6 weeks, and he's so desperate, you know, he has a kidney stone. They can't remove it. It was hard to remove then. So what he does is go to the back stairs of the clinic that he's in and jump up and down the stairs hoping to dislodge this kidney stone. You can hardly believe it. He finally gets out, and he's lost 6 weeks of the campaign, and he's far behind, and he's this desperate campaign to catch up. And I had a different note on my desk then, and it said, "Is there desperation on this page?" And I tried to, I don't say I succeeded in doing that, but I don't think, you know, your question is, what could we, or someone's question is, what do you do to change this? I don't think anyone can change your rhythm. You know, that's something that you do it yourself.
If you're a real writer, whether you like it or not, or know it or not, you have a style.
Yeah.
And it's you. So that if you're a really good reader, you can sort of recognize a manuscript or something by the style of the writing, because it reflects the thinking of the writer.
Someone wants to know, this question for you, is there a different sort of approach that you take to fiction and nonfiction, and someone like Bob, who sort of is a nonfiction writer who works like a novelist, is that something that bridges both, or do you have a very different approach for fiction and nonfiction when you're editing?
No, because as I think I say it in the film, I can't remember. But when you have a suggestion, what it means is that you've been reading along and you're stopped. Something stops you. And it can be anything. It can be, this is wonderful, I want more of it. Or this has been said before, or I don't get this, what's he saying here? And the fact that you're stopped, you're reading freely, and then you're not anymore, you have a reaction, and then you say, well, why am I reacting this way? Is there something wrong here? And if there is, if you still think there is, then you have to approach the writer with that, sometimes with a suggestion of how to fix it, sometimes not. Some writers don't want suggestions. They're very happy to hear that there's an issue. They want to solve it themselves. Others want you to help them solve it. You know, it's all intuition. It's different in every case. It's interesting always. And as I say, I like being edited, and I like editing because I like that process.
Yeah, to be on both sides of it. I think this is a question more for you, Bob. This, Joe and Jimmy, who say they're huge fans of yours, want to know how digitization of primary sources has affected your work, and do you think technology has been a burden for the next generation of biographers or a benefit?
Say the first part of that again?
How has digitization of primary sources affected your work?
Well, luckily for me, it's affected it very little because most of the Lyndon Johnson library is not digitized. There are ways, you know, the world is turning towards digitization. I'm not sure how that's going to relate to the feeling that I was given as a young investigative journalist, turn every page. I'm not sure enough about that. We don't really know how digitization is going to change not only research but writing. It seems to me it's going to change it in some ways. Some ways for the better. You know, I'm doing Vietnam now. So the Senate Foreign Relations Committee held hearings on Vietnam, the Fulbright hearings, and it's something like, these are wrong figures, 8 volumes of like 900 pages each, but I'll tell you the pages are all, the type is very small and the margins are very small also. So you'd have a hard time dealing with that except with control fines. You can put in the name of the battle and see all the references to that. I don't think we know how digitization is going to change research.
One more for you. If you were 25 years old today, would you still pick the nature of political power as a lifelong project? And do you think the nature of political power has changed since you began?
Would I pick political power? You have to. I'd like to think I would, because I realized. When I started out on these books, I didn't really realize that these books would have to be, if I really wanted to write about political power truly, I couldn't just write about the people who wield power. I had to write also about the people on whom it is wielded, for good or for ill, the powerless. I could take one moment to give you an example. And in fact, to tell you the moment I think that came to me,
Okay.
It's when I thought I was writing a book about Robert Moses. Why did I think I was writing that book? Because when I was typing as a reporter, you typed City Park Commissioner Robert Moses, and you said, what does that have to do with the fact that he's building the Long Island Expressway? It says New York State Power Authority Chairman Robert Moses. What is this gigantic thing that he's doing up in Messina and Niagara that nobody knows about? So I'm doing the research from that standpoint, and I come to when he's building the Northern State Parkway, and you look at the map, and all of a sudden the parkway dips south. It's going this way, and it dips south, and then comes back. Then comes back up to this other route. Why does it dip south? Well, by looking through papers and all, I find out that the reason is that if it had continued on its ordinary route, on its straight route, it would have gone through the golf course of one of the robber barons of the North Shore, Otto Kahn, and he paid Moses. He did not in a correct. He gave Moses, the Long Island State Park Commission, $10,000 for surveys, so they could change the route. And there was a time the legislature was cutting off Moses' funds, so Moses accepted. It wasn't for himself, but he did this. So in the course of it, you looked at these maps, and the estates of the big robber barons were so big that the names of the owners, J.P. Morgan, Henry Stimson, was on the map. But where the road finally runs, there are 23 little dots. And for some reason, which I don't really know, I said, I want to find out about some of those dots. I knew they were little farms. And with Ina's help, I remember it was hard to find these people. A lot of them had moved away. We were sitting on the floor of the telephone directory room at the New York Public Library, which has directories for all these little towns, trying to find these people. And we find one named Roth. And I went to interview them, and they told me this story about how they were poor, and they had bought this farm on Long Island, and the reason they could afford it was so cheap because it was filled with stumps and boulders, and you couldn't farm it. But they pulled out the stumps and the boulders. In order to do that, they had two mules, but the mules often couldn't get the boulders out, or the stumps out, so that James Roth, the farmer, and sometimes Helen Roth, his wife, would get into harness with the mules to pull. And when they did that, they would give the reins to their son, Henry Jr., who would sit on the wagon seat and hold the reins as the horse. But they finally got the farm cleared, and they could make it pay. And then that very time when they decided they finally did it, a man drives up and says he's a representative of the Long Island State Park Commission. That's Robert Moses. and we're condemning your land right out of the middle of the farm for the Northern State Parkway route. And Mrs. Roth and Henry, the father had died, Henry said, we pleaded with them, we said, just move this, if you'll just move this parkway about 400 yards, as I recall, south, that the rest of the farm will be intact and it can work. What you're doing is you're taking it out of the most fertile area, but more important, it's right in the middle of the farm, and the farm is never going to be able to be workable. And the representative of Robert Moses said, no, engineering considerations dictate that the route only run here. And I knew in that moment, I said, they're part of the story of the Northern State Parkway, too. If you want to tell the story of the Northern State Parkway, you can't just tell the story of Robert Moses. You got to tell the story of the people who were affected by it. And that was really when I decided that you really had to tell that story, too. So
right.
and that's why I did my books that way.
We have a few more minutes. I wanted to ask you both, one thing, Lizzie, I noticed about this film was in certain ways, it's also a book about two long marriages. And I wanted to ask you both just about how your families have helped you do this work over the last many decades and years, and how because I was so struck in the film by the support you've both had in your long marriages.
My family has helped by staying out of my way when I'm working. But luckily, my wife was a working actress always,
Yes.
so she wasn't around.
Excuse me. Wait,
So-
did you just say she wasn't around?
She wasn't around when I was working. She wasn't bothering me.
She was raising the children,
Well,
taking care of everything else, while being a working actress.
do you really think that she did all of that? Those meals I prepared so lovingly?
Oh, I just think it's a beautiful testament to both. I mean, Ina, too, is she's a character in the film, but also just such a vibrant character in your life. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say these books wouldn't exist without her. Ina.
Well, Ina helped by not getting out of my way. Actually, what happened with Ina is this, I can't remember what you've already seen on the screen, but there was a time I hurt my back while I was doing The Power Broker. We were up in the Bronx, and for those of you who are in the audience, when you get to be 30 years old, you should never try to play intramural basketball. But I hurt my back badly, and for some long period of time couldn't get out of bed, and I needed to do research. So we were doing it on Robert Moses' letting the Nassau County Republican machine have inside information on the Meadowbrook Parkway so he could build Jones Beach. And so I knew the Mineola, Long Island courthouse by heart from my days as a reporter. So I'd tell Ina, is this in the film? Am I repeating myself? No. So I told Ina to go to the second floor of the Mineola courthouse, and there's a phone booth there. Call me. And she called me, and I said, now turn around. There's the swinging double doors of the county clerk's office. Go through it and go to this aisle and look in there, and we'll start looking there. And she learned, Ina, who was a medieval historian, that's when she started to help me with the work. She's done a lot of wonderful pieces of research. I think I should say that she's written 2 wonderful books of her own about France, The Road from the Past, Traveling Through History in France, and Paris to the Past, which are really both classics of travel literature. The Road from the Past came out in 1994, and it's still selling. So but she's always there helping me with my research when I need her. So don't listen to that, Ina. You're not that good.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you have time for me to tell a rather extended story that I think reveals everything
Please.
you need to know about how this person operates.
Yes.
Don't worry, it's a
I'm leaving the
yeah,
stage.
no. This is a pretty story.
Oh,
I'm
This
ready.
is a very pretty story. How do I even begin? So, I'm working on The Power Broker, and of course it's riveting and thrilling. And one of the things it is, its tone is so authoritative. So, you know that it's right. And then a moment came when it occurred to me, yeah, the tone is authoritative, but how can he have found out all this stuff? And one of the things that struck me was, he writes, when he was doing his research into Robert Moses's mother, very important, he is spending a great deal of time down in the settlement house that she founded to help poor Jews mostly go to the country, get some fresh air in the summer. And he's going through all these files. And he reads that the Moseses, the senior Moseses, the parents, used to spend a week or two in a cabin in the settlement house plate where the kids were sent. And every morning, they would get a newspaper, the New York Times was delivered, and one day they're reading the Times and some kid is still standing there, and there's a story about the young firebrand Robert Moses, who is still a liberal and doing everything for the good of humanity. And there's a story about how he has lost a lawsuit and has to be paid, and they have to pay, is it $15,000? $20,000, a lot of money in them days, and still a lot of money, let's face it. And one of them turns to the other when he or she sees this in the paper and says, so, well, this is going to cost us $20,000. She says to him about what happened in the settlement camp 50 years earlier or 40 years earlier. So I, not being a devil's advocate, but curious really, said, so Bob, how did you find out what Mr. Moses said to Mrs. Moses or vice versa 150 years ago that was in the New York Times in the summer camp then? And he said, oh, that's easy to explain. So what happened was that every year when they were there, they'd sit on the porch having breakfast, and a kid from the camp would be sent up with the daily New York Times. And he was still standing there when they saw this headline in the New York Times. And so, Bob said, naturally, I wanted to find this person if he was findable. Yeah, that's natural, I guess. It's something. So he started to go through the files again. He found all these names, and he started of these kids now in their 60s, presumably. And he is matching names in the telephone directory with names in these lists of kid campers. And he starts calling, looking in the Times, and he matches some up, and he comes upon the guy, now in his 60s, who was the boy who delivered the paper and overheard this remark. And then I thought, but the great thing was that he didn't say it as if that was special, because that's what you did. And I never asked him again how he found anything out. True.
We're almost coming to the end, but I think there's, I'm going to paraphrase a question from here, but there's some young writers in the audience, some people who want to be writers, want to be editors, and I wonder if you have any parting words of advice for people that are wanting to pursue either field, something you've learned over your long career, something that you would send people off with as they try to pursue this work.
It's read, read, read. That's it. Read, read, read. Then maybe you can write, write, write.
Mine would probably be right, right, right.
I'll say one thing.
Do you want to say one thing? Lizzie?
I just wanted to say quickly, our movie that we started at our kitchen table has been bought by Sony Pictures Classics, and it's coming out in theaters at the end of the month. And if you liked it, would you please ask people to go see it?
Thank you all for coming, and yes, please spread the word of this wonderful film. Thank you again.